Okay, hi everyone, welcome back to this evening's live stream for Windows Server 2003. Just want to share my screen. Okay. So queries for services. Windows Server 2003 uses some special domains, not unlike the inaddr.arp domain you just read about, to make it possible for domain clients to look up services they need. It turns out that RFC 2052 specifies how this mechanism should work. However, there's a Microsoft twist. The underscore character isn't legal in domain names, so Microsoft uses it to mark its special domains to keep them from colliding with RFC 2052 compliant domains. There are a total of 4 of these trick Windows Server 2003 domains underscore .msdcs. This domain contains a list of all the Windows Server 2003 domain controllers in a designated normal domain. Each domain controller, global catalog, and PDC emulator is listed here, underscore sites. Each site has its own subdomain with the underscore sites domain. In AD parlance, a site is a group of connected network subnets that have high bandwidth between them. .tc_TCP. This domain lists service records for services that run on TCP, LDAP, Kerberos, the K passwd, password changer, and the global catalogs underscore UDP. This domain lists services that run on UDP, Kerberos, and the K passwd service. When any network client wants to find a service, for instance, a domain controller, it can query its DNS server for the appropriate SRV record. By making a recursive query, the client can force the local DNS server to poke around in the domain until it finds the desired information. Zone transfers. DNS is such an important part of the network that you simply cannot use a single DNS server. If that server fails, the network fails. Adding a secondary server provides DNS redundancy and helps to reduce the load on the primary server because resolvers can distribute their queries across multiple DNS servers. Secondary DNS servers receive their zone databases through zone transfers. When you configure a secondary server for the first time, you must specify the primary server that is authoritative for the zone and will send the zone transfer. The primary server must also permit the secondary server to request the zone transfer. Zone transfers occur in one of two ways: full zone transfers, AXFR, and incremental zone transfers, IXFR. When a new secondary server is configured for the first time, it receives a full zone transfer from the primary DNS server. The full zone transfer contains all the information in the DNS database. Some DNS implementations always receive full zone transfers. After the secondary server receives its full zone transfer, subsequent zone transfers are incremental. The primary name server compares its zone version number with that on the secondary server and sends only the changes that have been made in the interim. This significantly reduces network traffic generated by zone transfers. So migrating the DNS database files. You can migrate the DNS database files from your older systems to Windows Server 2003 in one of 3 ways. Upgrade Windows NT4 or 2000 to Windows Server 2003. When you upgrade to Windows Server 2003 from NT4 or 2000, all of your zone files remain intact and are stored in the same folder locations. Manually move the bind files. Because the Windows Server 2003 DNS service is based on bind, and bind is based on standardized RFCs, you can literally copy and paste bind files into the DNS directory on the DNS server. Be aware that some features of Unix bind files won't be recognized by Windows Server 2003, but that's okay because you never would have been able to implement those features anyway. Be aware that the bind files you receive from your Unix brethren use a different naming convention as shown in table 6.3. Migrate using zone transfers. You can set up your Windows Server 2003 DNS server with secondary zones for each of your primary zones. Then set up your current primary servers to allow the Server 2003 computer to receive zone transfers and immediately perform a full zone transfer. At this point, the Server 2003 DNS server has everything it needs to be the primary server for the domain. All you need to do is convert the zones on the Server 2003 computer to primary zones. If you want your new primary DNS server to perform zone transfers, you will also need to configure the secondary servers in your network to point to the new server and specify that the secondary servers are valid in the primary server's properties. So here we have table 6.3. Bind files in Windows and Unix. So Windows boot domain underscore name.dns, IP underscore network underscore reverse underscore notation.dns, name.boot, db domain underscore name, db IP underscore network underscore forward underscore notation. Installing and configuring a DNS server. DNS can be installed before, during, or after installing the Active Directory service. If the Active Directory installation wizard cannot locate a DNS server, it'll ask you if you would like the Active Directory installation wizard to install and configure a DNS server for you. Using this feature is the simplest method of installing a DNS server for the Active Directory service. The following sections describe the steps to manually prepare a DNS server and how to further configure Windows Server 2003 DNS to fully support your network infrastructure. Installing a DNS server. Installing the DNS server is easy because you install it with the same tools you use to add other components. When you install the DNS server, you get the DNS snap-in installed too. You can open the DNS snap-in by choosing Start Administrative Tools DNS. The snap-in is shown in figure 6.3. So you can see here 6.3 snap-in. As you can see, it follows the standard Microsoft Management Console MMC model. The left-hand pane shows you which servers and zones are available. You can connect to servers in addition to the one you're already talking to. Each server contains subordinate items grouped into folders. Each zone has a folder which is named after the zone itself. In figure 6.3, you can see that server SYBEX1 has a forward lookup zone for cibex1.com. Configuring a DNS server. Configuring a DNS server ranges from very easy to very difficult, depending on what you're trying to make it do. The simplest configuration is a caching-only server. You don't have to do anything except make sure the server's root hints are set correctly. You can also configure a root name server or set up round robin and net mask ordering, as you will see. Configuring a caching only server. Although all DNS name servers cache queries that they have resolved, caching only servers are DNS name servers that only perform queries, cache the answers, and return the results. They are not authoritative for any domains, and the information that they contain is limited to what has been cached while resolving queries. Accordingly, they don't have any zone files and they don't participate in zone transfers. When a caching-only server is first started, it has no information in its cache. The cache is gradually built over time. Caching-only servers are very easy to configure. After installing the DNS service, simply make sure that the root hints are configured properly. Right-click your DNS server and choose the Properties command. When the Properties dialog box appears, switch to the Root Hints tab, figure 6.4. If your server is connected to the internet, you should see a list of root hints for the root servers maintained by InterNIC. If not, use the Add button to add root hints as defined in cache.dns file. So you can see here figure 6.4, the root hints tab of the DNS server properties dialog box. Configuring a root name server. If your Windows Server 2003 computers aren't directly connected to the internet, or if you want to prevent them from ever referring queries to the internet, you can configure them to contain their own root zone. Remember that root zones are treated as the authoritative source of information for a top-level domain. By creating your own root zones, you can control exactly which domains your clients can resolve queries for. The process of doing this is pretty simple. The configure a DNS server wizard appears automatically after you install the DNS service. See exercise 6.1 in this chapter, or you can do it manually by right-clicking the DNS server and selecting the Configure a DNS Server command. Configuring advanced properties. Earlier in this chapter, you saw how round robin and netmask ordering work to load balance a DNS host. By default, the Windows Server 2003 implementation of DNS enables both round-robin and netmask ordering. If you want to disable or enable either of these features, you should select or deselect the appropriate options in the Advanced tab of the Server Properties dialog box. If any of your secondary DNS servers run versions of Bind prior to 4.9.4, they won't be able to process the compressed packets that your Windows Server 2003 computer sends them. You can enable or disable Bind secondaries in the Advanced tab as well. Creating new zones. You can use the new zone wizard to create a new forward or reverse lookup zone. The process is substantially the same, even though the steps and wizard pages can differ somewhat. In either case, you create a new zone first by right-clicking the server you want to host the zone and then selecting New Zone. This starts up the New Zone wizard. You also create new zones using the Configure a DNS Server wizard, as you will see in exercise 6.1, although the steps are slightly different. Creating a new forward lookup zone. Once you dismiss the welcome page, the first choice you have to make is the zone type page. Here you can choose what kind of zone you want this to be. You can choose from primary, secondary, and stub, as well as whether or not the zone will be stored in Active Directory. Which option you'll use depends on what you're doing. If you want the DNS server to be authoritative for the zone, select the primary zone option. If you want to set up your server as a secondary server, choose the secondary radio button. Later in the process, you'll be prompted to specify which primary zone you want to transfer data from. Stub zones contain only the information necessary to identify the authoritative DNS servers for a zone. You would typically only select the stop zone option if your server has delegated child zones that it needs to keep track of. You will learn more about zone delegation later in this chapter. If you want to store zone data in Active Directory, be sure to check the Store the Zone in Active Directory option. Note that there's no such thing as an ADI secondary zone. No matter which zone type you choose, the next step is to pick whether you want to create a forward or reverse lookup zone. At this point, we'll assume you want to create a forward zone. The steps for creating a reverse zone are covered in the next section. Forward zones need to have names. You specify the name you want the zone to have using the zone name page of the wizard. For an AD integrated or primary zone, you have to specify the name including the suffix. Microsoft isn't a valid name, but Microsoft.com would be. If you're creating a secondary zone, there will be a browse button you can use to locate the primary zone you want to copy. If you're building a new AD integrated zone, you're done once you specify the name. However, if you're setting up a standard primary zone, you must specify where you want the zone data stored on the zone file page, figure 6.5. The default file name will be the same as the zone name with .dns on the end, but you can modify it freely. You can also combine more than one zone's data into a single zone file, though it makes it a little harder to sort out what's what. So you can see here, figure 6.5, the zone file page of the new zone wizard. You can also specify how dynamic updates are handled. Specifically, you can choose to allow dynamic updates, allow only secure dynamic updates on domain controllers only, or not allow dynamic updates. Because secondary zones have to transfer their zone data from somewhere else, you have to specify where exactly it comes from. Figure 6.6 shows the master DNS servers page of the new zone wizard. Use the controls here to specify which DNS servers your server will contact to request zone transfers. If you specify more than one server here, your server will try the servers in the order specified. So I'm going to leave it here this evening for this live stream. Thanks for spending the evening with me, and have a good evening.